Hey YouTubers and Patriots, voice of the composer here. Welcome back to my channel. It is Wednesday afternoon. Hope you're all having a great week so far. Can't believe tomorrow's Christmas Eve, so hopefully you're all getting geared up for the holiday. Then we're going to have New Year's, and before you know it, it'll be 2021. It's been a weird year, hasn't it? So I'm sorry that I have not posted any videos recently, and the reason for that is because I've been working on this one particular video. Now, originally, I wanted to talk about the Csa Constitution, Constitution of the Confederacy, because a lot of people don't know that they actually had a constitution. And I was going to compare it to the Articles of Confederation, our first constitution, which was implemented on November 15th, 1777. But the more I looked into this, you can't avoid the big question. Why did the South secede? Was it over slavery? Was it over states' rights? And as I'm going through all this research, it becomes apparent that there were a lot more things going on besides slavery. Give you an example. Spain. Everybody forgets about our conflicts with Spain, the latter part of the 18th century, all the way through the 19th century, leading up to the Spanish-American War. And there's a little juicy tidbit about that regarding the Civil War. So, without going too far astray here, let me read you something. Tell me which document you think this is from. And I'm going to be talking about the U.S. Constitution, too. But is this from the Articles of Confederation or the Csa Constitution? Now, the Csa Constitution was implemented on March 11th, 1861. The U.S. Constitution, 1787. Then it was ratified in 1791. Don't forget, in between, we had the French Revolution in 1789. So what was going on in France and Europe at the time affected politics here and how we ratified our Constitution. But let me read you this. Tell me which document you think this is from. Articles of Confederation or the Csa Constitution. The style of this confederacy shall be the United States. The style of this confederacy shall be the United States. Articles of Confederation, or would you say that's from the Csa Constitution? Well, this is actually Article 1, one sentence, Article 1 from the Articles of Confederation. Are you surprised? Now, if you go to Article 2 of the Articles of Confederation, it proclaims that each state is sovereign, independent, and given every power, jurisdiction, and right not delegated to Congress. Well, if you take a look at the Csa Constitution, just look at the preamble. This is what it says. We, the people of the Confederate States, each state acting in its sovereign and independent character, in order to form a permanent federal government, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, invoking the favor and guidance of Almighty God, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the Confederate States of America. Now, there's a word missing out of the preamble to their Constitution. The word that's missing is slavery. You will not find the word slave or slavery in the preamble to the Csa Constitution. But what you do find is exactly what you have in Article 2 of the Articles of Confederation. And by the way, when they implemented the U.S. Constitution, it took power away from the states. And I'll read you that here in a moment from the U.S. Constitution. But you have what it says here in Article 2 of the Articles of Confederation, that each state is sovereign, independent, and given every jurisdiction and right not delegated to Congress. Csa Constitution Preamble. Each state acting in its sovereign and independent character in order to form a permanent federal government. So what the Csa wanted to do was give power back to the states, create this permanent federal government with limited power. Now, when you look at Article 1 of the Csa Constitution, there's a change in language of the power given to Congress. They don't use the word vested that you see in the U.S. Constitution. They use the word delegated. So let me read you the U.S. Constitution section here regarding Congress, powers of the Congress. Article 1, Section 1. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. Here they use the word vested. The Csa Constitution uses the word delegated. So these states were to be sovereign and independent in the Csa, permanent federal government with delegated powers that are determined by the state. So if you look at Article 4 of the Articles of Confederation, it talks about freedom of travel, freedom of trade, privileges, immunities. The better to secure and perpetuate mutual friendship and intercourse among the people of the different states in this union, the free inhabitants of each of these states, paupers, vagabonds, fugitives from justice excepted, shall be entitled to all privileges and immunities of free citizens in the several states, and the people of each state shall have free ingress and regress. That language is not in the U.S. Constitution, by the way, although it does talk about privileges and immunities. So you have free ingress and regress to and from any other state, and shall enjoy therein all the privileges of trade and commerce, subject to the same duties, impositions, and restrictions as the inhabitants thereof respectively, provided that such restrictions shall not extend so far as to prevent the removal of property imported in any state, etc., etc. So if you go to the CSA Constitution and you look at Article 4, Section 2, Clause 1, says the citizens of each state shall be entitled to all the privileges and immunities in these of the citizens in the several states, and shall have the right of transit and sojourn in any state of this confederacy with their slaves and other property, and the right of property in said slaves shall not be thereby impaired. So here in Article 4 of the Articles of Confederation, it says practically the same thing. And in a roundabout way, it talks about slavery because it mentions paupers, vagabonds, fugitives from justice accepted. And the reason why this is put in the CSA Constitution, Article 4, Section 2, Clause 1, is because you were having an issue where Southerners were being banned from going into the new territories at the time, and a lot of cities in the North because you didn't want slave owners there. But you also had this issue where you had slaves who voluntarily went to run errands for their master or to travel with their master or what have you. They were barred from entering these cities as well. Freemen were barred from entering certain places in the North. So this said anybody who was a citizen, and you did have slaves that were freed in the South, anybody who was a citizen of the CSA could travel wherever they wanted, slave owner or not, with their property. They'd be secure in that property. That's all this is saying. And they do have an early version of the Articles of Confederation of the Fugitive Slave Clause. It says here, if any person guilty of or charged with treason, felony, or other high misdemeanor in any state shall flee from justice and be found in any of the United States, shall, upon demand of the governor or executive power of the state from which he fled, be delivered up and removed to the state having jurisdiction of his offense. Now, if you take a look at the CSA Constitution, you'll see something similar. Article 4, Section 2, Part 3. No slave or other person held to service or labor in any state or territory of the Confederate States, under the laws thereof, escaping or lawfully carried into another, shall, in consequence of any law or regulation therein, be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered up on claim of the party to whom such slave belongs or to whom such service or labor may be due. Now, the big argument is that the U.S. Constitution is not a slave document. Well, the truth is, it is, because it does mention slavery in a roundabout way. Give you a couple examples here. So let's go to, talked about the powers given to Congress. So these are the powers that you can say are given pretty much to the state. So here is the, should we do the slave clause? No person held to service or labor in one state under the laws thereof, escaping into another, shall, in consequence of any law or regulation therein, be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered up on claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due. U.S. Constitution. And this is Article 4, Section 2, Clause 3. So you're seeing a lot of similarities between these documents. Now, I want to go back to the Articles of Confederation because I'm going to throw Spain in here in just a sec. So if we go back to the Articles of Confederation, let me go through my notes here, folks. Folks, I wrote out tons of notes. I mean, tons of notes. You should see this. It's crazy. But there is a section in here that you will not find in the U.S. Constitution, or you will find in the CSA Constitution, that specifically talks about Spain, France and Spain. And it says this: no state shall lay any impost or duties which may interfere with any stipulations and treaties entered into by the United States in Congress, assembled with any king, prince, or state in pursuance of any treaties already proposed by Congress to the courts of France and Spain. This is important to note because we're going to take a look at Spanish Florida. Here's what happened with Spanish Florida. We had Spanish settlement and exploration 1513 to 1698. In 1763, the area was transferred to Great Britain. Then it was returned back to Spain in 1783. By the way, this treaty that was signed in 1783 is mentioned in South Carolina's Declaration of Secession. A lot of people don't know that. Then you have the Picpus Treaty of 1795. This defined the border between the United States and Spain, guaranteed U.S. navigation rights on the lower Mississippi River. And in between, I've talked about this before, lo and behold, you have this little event called the Republic of West Florida, where you have these American and British settlers that were under Spanish rule. They wanted to become their own independent colony. For the first time, we see the first sign of Southern independence, where they raised the Bonnie Blue flag in September of that year. It was they said the date's kind of debatable, but it's September 24th, 25th, or 26th, one of those 3 days, where they raised the Bonnie Blue flag and declared their independence from Spain. And they wanted the United States to recognize them as an independent colony, but the U.S. refused to do so because they did not want to get into a war with Spain. By the way, the Bonnie Blue flag was the very first flag used in the first days of the Civil War for the Confederacy. See how this is all connected? Isn't that weird? So we had issues with Spain, which brings me to something else that a lot of people don't know about this Civil War. So this is really juicy. So on the eve of the Civil War, there had been talk from the South, or rumors that the South was planning to expand down into Cuba. Well, Cuba was under Spanish control, and at that time, Spain did have slaves in Cuba. So what Lincoln did is he sent his minister to Spain, Carl Schurz, to convince Spain not to aid the Confederacy. But Spain did not want to let go of Cuba. They wanted that territory for themselves, so they never entered an alliance with the South. So what they did is on June 17, 1861, they declared neutrality. But they were always suspicious of both the North and the South because earlier in the 1840s, I think late 1830s, early 1840s, we had our eyes on expanding in Cuba or doing trade in Cuba. So Madrid calls neutrality at the beginning of the Civil War, June 17, 1861. But 3 years later, you would have a revolt, Cuba's first fight for independence from Spain, 1868 to 1878. Then you had the Little War from 1879 to 1880. And then in between, before you get to 1898 with the Spanish-American War, we have the Virginia affair, which was a dispute between the United States, UK, and Spain. And it would all finally come to a halt when we had the Spanish-American War in 1898. So as you can see, we had more going on than just slavery in the South. Conflicts with Spain. We had, I think, a few minor conflicts with France, latter part of the 18th century. We had the Louisiana Purchase. By the way, when the Louisiana Purchase happened, or just about a year before then, I think so, 1803, Northerners were thinking about seceding. They weren't happy with the election of Thomas Jefferson. And I was debating this morning with somebody about what was going on in 1857. This is also another juicy bit. I have to share this. So everyone thinks that the South were the only ones that ever planned to secede. We know that they did attempt to secede, and they did. But in 1857, a young minister who was hardly known at the time by the name of Thomas Wentworth Higginson, he was an advocate for abolitionism. He believed in women's rights, women's suffrage, and he was not happy with the election in 1856, late 1856, of President Buchanan. So in January of 1857, he calls a meeting at the Old Worcester City Hall, and he's calling for secession because he, along with I forget his name, William Lloyd Garrison, they saw our pact, or the Constitution, Garrison called it this, a pact with the devil, and the Union a compromise with sin. So there was this convention, and this convention, they debated on abolition. They had both sides come to the table talking about, should we keep slavery, should we abolish it? This was the rise of the Republican Party, but this is secession that was talked about by the abolitionists 3 to 4 years before the Civil War. So could you imagine the scenario that the free states, and the whole thing was that they would secede, the free states would secede, and leave the slave states to themselves. So imagine that scenario. It wouldn't be the slave states they would be seceding. It would be the free states in 1857 or 1858 had they seceded with secession. But go check this out. It was a big to-do. It was in the papers at that time. See, this is what changes the whole narrative about the Civil War, doesn't it? Because you're always taught about what happened with the Cornerstone speech, the Articles of Secession, or Declarations of Secession, rather. And you have this passage here from the Csa Constitution, which people say, hey, well, this shows you right here that they had no intention whatsoever of getting rid of slavery. Well, the truth is that because the states in the CSA were independent and sovereign, as it states in the preamble to their Constitution, guess what? A state could pass a law to abolish slavery if they chose to do so. All the limits, if you look at Article 1 of the CSA Constitution, are in Congress, not on the states. But this is the passage that people misquote. And there's a reason that this is in here. It has to do with the Carriage Act of 1794, where you had a higher number of carriages in the South, and they were passing this tax in this thing known as the Carriage Act. So it says here, Article 1, Section 9, Clause 4, no bill of attainder, ex post facto law, or law denying or impairing the right of property in Negro slaves shall be passed. This is their wording, by the way. But if you look at the CSA, the U.S. Constitution, and you look at the following, this is in Article 1, Section 10. This is the limits to the states. It says, no state shall enter into any treaty, alliance, or confederation. But, of course, they seceded first to have these declarations of secession, voted on it in these states before they actually formed the Confederacy. Grant letters of marque and reprisal, coin money, emit bills of credit, etc., etc. But it says this, pass any bill of attainder, ex post facto law, or law impairing the obligation of contracts, or grant any title of nobility. Well, right here, we have the same language, pretty much, impairing. It doesn't say denying in the U.S. Constitution in this passage, but it does say impairing, the same wordage you find here in the CSA Constitution. Obligation of contracts. Slavery was categorized or put in that category of contracts because a lot of slave labor, a lot of labor back then was done through contracts because don't forget you had indentured servitude. So you can make the argument that the U.S. Constitution is a slave document. But my main point, I guess, is to kind of point out all these layers that happened during the Civil War. And we got to look back at the Articles of Confederation and take a look at the U.S. Constitution, look at the CSA Constitution, because when you put it all together, it creates a totally different picture than what we're taught in the history book. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please click that like button, subscribe, hit me up on Instagram at hashtag Jason Composes, leave comments below, and now you can reach me at Twitter, Voice of the Composer at Twitter. Thank you for being with me, and you all have a Merry Christmas. Take care, everybody.